Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hello, and welcome to the Authors on Mission podcast, the podcast committed to bringing you top-tier insights and strategies from experts in their field who've also written a book. I'm your host, Danielle Hutchinson, Chief Creative Officer of Authors on Mission. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Daryl Dittmer, author of the compelling books When I Stop Fighting and When You Stop Fighting. Daryl's journey is nothing short of transformative. After entering treatment at a young age, he embarked on a path of self-discovery and improvement, spanned many decades, and he's channeled his experiences into writing that helps others change the trajectory of their own lives. His message of personal accountability, growth, and finding joy resonates with readers looking to make more meaningful connections. So today we're going to talk all about how Daryl turned his challenging beginnings into a course of motivation and positive change. And of course, the writing process that brought him to these incredible books. So without further ado, Daryl, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much, Danielle. It's great to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
Always. I think that your personal story just really resonates with many people out there, not to mention that you were able to write a book about it and kind of share that with anybody else who needs that guidance, needs to know that there's other people out there who have their back, have been through similar things. I think it's an incredible thing that you've done, for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I feel like we go through life and we're able to accumulate, hopefully, some things that can help some other folks out. And I feel like I've been able to, through hard lessons, have accumulated a few things that can help others, which is really why I wrote my books. And I feel like my purpose in life at this point is to just give back. And that's what I'm looking to do.
Awesome. No, I love that. And, to any aspiring authors out there, this is one of the incredible reasons why we do write books, right? To share those experiences and teach others about it. So, yeah, thanks a lot. And, kind of segueing off of that, I would like to start the podcast with a little question going along the lines of, tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to writing these books.
Sure. Yeah, it's a story, that's for sure. I grew up in the Midwest, Michigan, to be more exact. And my dad was a mechanic, and he was a veteran of the Korean War. He was a pretty tough dude. And my mom stayed home and took care of us kids. And she was also strict and maybe even tougher than my dad. That was from whence I came as far as that household. And I think a great illustration is, as far as my dad goes, when I was 14 years old, we were at church. We lived out in the country at that time. After church, my dad put me in front of one of the local farmers and said, "Can you put him to work?" And so I got to work, and the farmer said yes. Nobody asked about how I felt about it or whether I wanted to or not. That was just what we did, and that was kind of how it was at that time. And so I went to work for $1.50 an hour, and that's what I did for many summers and off season, in terms of off school and that sort of thing. So that was one story that illustrated my dad. Another one I think that's kind of funny is, you may not think it's funny, but I think it's funny looking back, is I used to traipse around barnyards all the time working on this farm, and there was, all kinds of cow droppings and pigs and all that sort of thing. And I had tennis shoes. That's what we called them back then. Now I think they're called sneakers. But tennis shoes is what we wore, and that's all I had. And they started to get holes in them. So I duct taped them, and I was trying to just keep all this nasty stuff out of my shoes. And I said to my dad one day, I said, I'd really love to get some work boots. And again, I'm 15 years old. And he said, "Well, yeah, you're working. Go get yourself some." That was how I grew up. And that was pretty black and white in terms of, you take care of yourself, you deal with your stuff. And I think they were trying to teach me that, the world isn't going to come to my rescue. I have to take charge and I have to do things. And I learned that lesson very well. When I was 13, I started drinking, and it was just, sort of kids hanging out at that point and drinking. I think a lot of people's story has that in it. But when I started, I loved it. I wanted to do it again, and I wanted to do it again, and I wanted to do it again. And I would drink sometimes to the point where I would just be sick, and I got involved in drugs. And it escalated fairly quickly to the point where I was involved in a whole bunch of drugs, dealing drugs, doing criminal type activities, lying and cheating and stealing, and just not the person that I was raised to be. And there was a real friction inside of me also because I knew that was not the right path. I knew that was not who I wanted to be or what I wanted to be. And so I was 18 and my parents basically did an intervention and said, look, either go talk to this drug counselor or have a nice life, was basically the message. And that was really a scary moment. I was just a kid. I was 18 years old, so I didn't know what was going on. And it was confusing and it was scary. But there was something inside of me that said, you know what? There's something about me that needs help. I believe I need help. And so I went to talk to this drug counselor, and I was planning on lying. I was planning on just, BSing him like I did everybody else in my life. And the moment I walked in the door, he said, you can't lie to me. Don't even try. I'll know when you do, and I'll kick you out of here, and you'll be in the same spot you were. So I didn't lie to him, at least to the best of my ability. And I was as honest as I could be at that point in my life, which I have no idea what I said to him, but I know that I was as honest as I could be because I was intimidated. And at the end, I said, what do you think? And I do remember this part. He said, well, I think we need to get you into treatment. So I went into a 30-day inpatient treatment program, and that was January 3rd of 1985. So December 31st of 1984, I was at a New Year's Eve party, and this really brought it home for me. I was at a New Year's Eve party, maybe a couple hundred people. It was a pretty big party, and I was never the loneliest or feeling most isolated or feeling the worst that I had felt ever in my life, to the point where I thought, you know what, I'm not sure I want to be on this planet anymore. I didn't know that that was the point then, but I know it now that that was the point where something inside of me knew that I needed to do something to get better and to change my life. And that's when my new life started. And I don't want to go on forever, Danielle, in terms of that story, if you have other questions. But that's what brought me to the point where I began doing things differently. And then 38 years later, decided to write a book.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for sharing that, experiences in your life, because whenever I talk to my authors that come on the show, it's important to know where they come from and what those experiences were that led them, to getting those words on the paper. So it is really important to know, and especially because, it does sound like, you had such a life of straightforward type, like very work ethic driven upbringing you had. So I'm sure that also played a part in the writing process too, because it does take a little bit of that work ethic along with the emotional meaning behind all of it to write your book. So it is all really important to know. But, I'm curious because when I was looking through your materials, you did mention to me that, now after all of this, your life has become, quote, better than you could have envisioned. So, before we dive into the aspects of your book, I'm wondering, just in your personal life, what aspects of your current life would have most surprised you about your 19-year-old self, and what might you have wished that you could told him back then?
Yeah, everything about my life would surprise my 19-year-old self. I've been all over the country. I've been quite a few places in the world. I grew up in a small town in a family that, that really, we weren't well off financially by any means. I remember, drinking powdered milk as a kid. I don't even know if they have that anymore.
I think they might, but I see what you mean.
Kind of horrifying.
Yeah.
And, my mom washing plastic sandwich bags because she wanted to reuse them. She didn't want them to go to waste. So, we weren't in great financial condition. And that was something that I wanted to change when I, started down the path of recovery. And that was something I did change. I got involved in business and did, deals and things all over the country. And that worked out well for me, which I knew that I had that as a goal and as an intention in my life, but I never really knew that that would be something that could truly come to fruition like it has. I go to bed at night with a clear conscience, and I wake up with a smile on my face, and I'm enjoy facing the world and facing my life and doing what I do, which I never would have thought was even possible when I was 19 years old. I have a wonderful relationship with my wife. I had great relationship with my parents. They're both deceased, but had great relationship with them as time went on, as I healed that relationship. My entire life is different. My circle is significantly smaller. I always wanted a big circle when I was younger, all these people around and always doing and, blah, 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 noisy, that sort of thing. And my circle is small. My circle is people who I'm very, very close to. I know how to have boundaries for myself. I know how to say no. There's just so many things that are so different from back then. And if there was anything I would tell my 19-year-old self, and I love this question because I think I surprise people when I give them the answer, but the answer is tell the 19-year-old Daryl to buckle up. It's going to be a tough ride. And that's it, because it took everything that it took that happened in my life up to this point to get me where I am. And if I changed one of those things, it could change the whole thing. And I don't want to change the whole thing because the whole thing's pretty cool at this point.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that, because you're right. I mean, that's one thing I think all of us would want to tell our younger selves, just buckle up and get ready for the ride. There's many things that are going to come our way, but you just have to put your best foot forward, at the end of the day.
Right.
So I can see how this translates directly into When I Stop Fighting. I mean, for example, your first book opens with the chapter, Winning Isn't Everything, which, kind of correlates exactly to what you were just saying. It's like, you think it might be a huge success at one point, or maybe if something's going right in your life, that's not the end all be all, I suppose, is perhaps what you're trying to say with that. Would you mind just sharing a little bit more about that and what made you choose this as an entry point for your readers?
Sure. I was telling the story of my early life in that first chapter and sort of how I came up, and some stories that some are funny, some are sad, some are messed up, all that sort of thing. And that story actually has several different meanings, but the reason that I came up with that for the chapter title was because I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and I enjoyed sports when I was a kid. I loved it. I just wanted to play baseball and basketball and football and whatever those sports were, and I was competitive. And we were in a mall one day, my mom and I, and like I said, I was 10, maybe 11. And I saw a t-shirt that said, winning isn't everything, but losing sucks. And my mom would not let me buy the t-shirt because it said sucks. And so that kind of bummed me out. That was not a win for me. But the other part of that is, it's about the journey, and it's so important to understand that. And it takes a while to understand that. It took me a while to understand that the journey is where the win is. The win is in doing the best I can every day to improve me, doing my best every day that I can to help other people with their lives. And that's really where the win is. It doesn't have to be knocking it out of the park every day. It doesn't have to be making $1 million. There's so much to be said for how we get there and how we move forward and how we do our lives. That really is the win. And another thing that I've adopted over time that has to do with that chapter and the message of that chapter is that I don't have to define everything as winning or losing or success or failure or good or bad or right or wrong. I have to go with what resonates for me. And sometimes I'll do well and sometimes I won't. And sometimes I'll win the game and sometimes I won't. And sometimes I'll feel bad and sometimes I'll feel defeated. But that's not the end. That's not a loss. That's just another stepping stone on the journey. And I think that's really crucial to understand as we're moving through this life, that there's going to be a ton of things that happen, good things, bad things, and things that we may like to label as that. And they don't have to be, because they're just steps along the path.
Understood. Yeah, it's all steps along the path, just like you mentioned before. I mean, you might think that wherever you're standing right now is the end all be all, but you keep growing with it and learning from those experiences, like you mentioned, and that's kind of how we get to where we need to be. And I think your book perfectly embodies that. the ups and the downs too. I know when I was looking through it, there was one part where you, for example, described, a not so good experience, right? The terrifying experience of feeling like you were being pulled down into unconsciousness.
Mm.
So it really is all about the highs and lows. I'm wondering, would you like to share a little bit about, that particular passage of the book and, what that experience taught you about yourself?
That experience was actually when I was in treatment, which was I was detoxing at that point. And as a 19-year-old kid, and for whatever the drugs and the alcohol and whatever it was did to me, I felt like I was being pulled down by something. It was evil. That's what it felt like. It felt like it was evil. Like I was being literally pulled down physically into a place where I wouldn't be able to get out of. And I was halfway in between consciousness and unconsciousness. It was just the weirdest thing. And it felt like a dream, but it wasn't a dream. And when I came back to some semblance of consciousness, I found myself pulled down almost to the floor on this bed in the treatment center. And I woke up and I was like, man, I don't want to experience that again, because I was happy that I wasn't some other place. I was happy that I was still alive. I was happy that I wasn't in, the fires of whatever hell might be. That's kind of what I felt like. And so I think that was an experience that felt like, man, I just can't be here anymore. I can't live this life anymore. I can't do the things that I used to do. And that one really helped convince me of that fact.
Understood. Yeah, thank you for that. And I mean, like I mentioned before, it's always good that we have these high points and low points both incorporated within our book, because I mean, at the end of the day, that's what our lives are all about too. We're always learning from every experience. But also, this is only about one of the first books, for When I Stopped Fighting. So perhaps we should also segue into your other book too. For example, there's a part of your other book in Chasing Happy is one of the sections. You share a story about being invited to a race in Antigua. So I guess that also shows a little more of a happier phase in your past. So, how does that experience represent the larger themes of your book and relate to your experiences also?
I started to do things, and I think this is important for growth in this lifetime. I started to do things that I was uncomfortable doing. I still am. I was 6'6". I was athletic. I was strong. I was able to, do some things in terms of my body. And so they asked me to be a grinder on the sailboat. And it was a big sailboat. And the grinder is the guy that does those things to grind the sails. And, it takes some strength and it takes some, just ability to move and duck and, some athletic ability. And so they asked me to do that. And I was scared to death. I hadn't been around boats and that sort of thing. It just wasn't part of my life, but it was a really cool experience because I was invited to Antigua Race Week and the British Virgin Islands Spring Regatta, and just really cool things where we do these sailboat races. And it was just so far out of how I grew up and what my life was used to. It was very uncomfortable, but it was very, very cool. We did it for several years.
That's cool. So it kind of became like a tradition, you would say. Is that correct?
It did. Yeah, it really did.
That's good. Yeah, because then you're not only encouraging yourself to kind of go through these each year, but also you're, building on a relationship active too. So huge, amazing thing to do. So maybe anybody listening today, it's something they should also, try to look into and embody also, whether you're an author or another, industry. It's always good to, set yourself on a path that's not the norm and, expand yourself in that way.
Right.
Yeah. So, thanks for sharing a little bit about that. So I'd also like to segue now into sort of the writing process for these books. So you mentioned that both the books took only about 6 months to write, which is really cool because, as a ghostwriter myself, I know that some books can take a long time, some can only take like a week. So, what was that process like for you in the 6 months? What was your daily writing routine like during this intense creative period?
So the 6 months was preceded by, I'll just dial it back a little bit because the story started I was probably 37, 38 years old. And my wife, we had recently met. and hadn't gotten married yet, but I was relating stories to her of my youth and some of our entertaining things and crazy things and all the sort of things that we did back then. And she'd look at me and she'd say, that's just not you. I'm just not seeing it. I'm not seeing this kid who's on drugs and messed up and lying and cheating and stealing and do all this sort of stuff. And I said, no, I'm not that guy anymore. And I said to her at that point, I said, remind me to write a book someday. And so she did remind me a couple of times, and life just, it gets busy, it gets crazy, and trying to raise a family and, do the business thing and traveling and all that stuff, just, you only have so much time. So I probably wrote 3 paragraphs over the next 18 years. But I still have the same file on my computer that holds both of my books now and all that sort of stuff, which is kind of cool. So finally, after the pandemic, we decided to move. We had a restaurant, we sold our restaurant. We had some other business interests, properties, that sort of thing. We sold them. We said, you know what, we're just going to bring it in a little bit and slow it down and do something different. And both my wife and I. And so I said, well, I guess it's a perfect time to start writing my book. And I can be an extreme person still. So I would wake up, first I wrote notes, I had no idea how to write a book, none whatsoever. I didn't read anything about writing a book. I didn't talk to anybody about how to write a book. I just started writing. And that's probably one of my best pieces of advice. If you don't know how, just start writing.
Start writing.
And so I started writing and started to form into something. And it was just stories. And there's a ton of stories in my books, which I like having it built around personal stories and the lessons and that sort of thing. But I would wake up at 3 a.m. and I would go up to the office and I would just start writing. And my wife would wonder where the heck I went, where I am. And I'd come down at some point to get another cup of tea or something like that. And I'd stay up there for 6 or 8 hours in a day and just write and write and write. The coolest part of the process for me was I remembered stories that I had long forgotten, and things just started bubbling up and experiences. And so it was a beautiful process. And writing the first book, when I got done with that, I knew I wasn't done. And my wife kind of knew I wasn't done too, because I had told her that I was going to write a book. And she said, well, I think you got 3 books in you. I'm like, yeah, well, we'll see. So when I finished the first one, the second one just started spilling out. And so that one took another 2 or 3 months to write. And here we are.
Now, so you said your wife said you had 3 books in you. Am I correct in saying you only have 2 out right now? Did I miss a third? Or
there's only 2 written right now. Yes.
Okay.
There's only 2 written right now.
Is that something to be thinking about for the future, or should we be on the lookout for a third? Or do you think that it kind of is encompassed in just 2?
No, it'll definitely be 3. I have an outline done for book 3, but since I published both books within a year, I wanted to take a break and I wanted to focus on getting the word out about my first 2 books and moving that marketing forward. And then sometimes for me, just ruminating helps. So as I start to write book 3, I will have ruminated long enough to just have that kind of come out. And I don't know what the time frame is going to be. It might take 2 months. It might take 6 months. It might take a year. But I would say I'll probably start writing it in about a year.
Got it. Okay. So about another year for the writing process. And so for anybody listening right now, if you're curious, I guess my best advice would be to dive into the first 2 and then be on the lookout for the third, perhaps in the years to come.
That's for sure.
So yeah, well, first off, if anybody is interested in checking out these books, now that we've mentioned them, where exactly can they best find it? And also if they want to ask you any questions to learn from you about the writing process, about your journey, where can they get in touch with you?
The best place to find me is my website, which is Daryl Dittmer, DarylDittmer.com. That's the best place to find me. My books are both on Amazon, and you can just type in When I Stop Fighting or When You Stop Fighting, and they'll pop up. Those are really the best places. I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter as my author name and my real name, Daryl Dittmer, and on Instagram and Facebook under When I Stop Fighting. Actually, I also have a podcast. Surprisingly, it's called When I Stop Fighting the Podcast. And that's on YouTube and Apple and Amazon Music and Spotify, et cetera, et cetera.
Awesome. Well, Daryl, we're going to put links to all of that in the description box of this podcast. So everybody listening today, go ahead and click on over there. Maybe wait for the podcast that you're listening to right now to be over, and then go ahead and click and check out some of these other links if you're interested in learning more about Daryl and his books. But before we, move along and wrap up today, I also want to just talk a little bit more about, the writing itself, because your writing style really does balance personal anecdotes with broader life lessons. So my question to you is, how do you strike that balance? There's a lot of people out there right now who are also struggling with deeply personal things, and they want to write about it. They're having trouble. What advice would you give them for that?
It's such a cleansing process. And I think a big part of healing, especially with addictions or attachment or traumas or whatever it might be, a big part of healing is to get it out. On my website, I have journals because I'm such a fan of writing, and I think people should write in terms of just getting things out on paper to be able to look at them and sort through them. And so it's a very cleansing process. And it's also a process which was near and dear to me, where I've been very fortunate in my life, and I've had some great mentors, and I've had some wonderful people come into my life, and I'm able to now give back and try to be that mentor for people and try to be that person that can help others. And that's such a motivation for me. And so if you ever get stuck, I think it's important to think about, there's other people that I can help in this process too. And sometimes that helped me continue the writing process.
Awesome. I love that. So kind of embracing it, not as something that's, harmful to yourself, but more so like it's allowing you to re-experience it and perhaps see it from new lenses and learn from it, which is kind of what we've been talking about this whole time, right? Like learning from those experiences. So, I agree completely. A lot of people come to me all the time, with their stories, and they're nervous about getting started, thinking it's going to open up old wounds or something like that. But it's, just like you said, Daryl, it's transformative, it's inspiring, it's something to embrace. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think sometimes it does open those wounds, but I think also sometimes those wounds need to be opened a little and looked at so that they can heal. And I think bringing them out into the light and into the air can help heal.
Yeah, 100%, definitely. So yeah, again, everybody, if you're interested in checking out the books, you can, find the links in the descriptions. Other than that, as we start to wrap up today, any last bits of advice before we head off, Daryl?
We talked a little bit about it, Danielle, and I think in terms of the writing process and writing books, and really anything in life that you're embarking upon in terms of a journey or something that you haven't done or you're trying to do or you want to do, I've found that the most important thing I can do is spend less time planning and more time doing, more time just starting. I wasn't thinking I was going to be a good writer when I first started writing my books. And I have an editor, and she's a wonderful editor and very highly educated and, Harvard University, all that sort of thing. And she came back to me and said, "Is this really your first book?" I'm like, "Yeah, it really is my first book." And she said, "It's wonderful." And she was surprised. And I'm not saying that to pump myself up. I'm saying that because I want to encourage other people to write. Just do it. You don't have to worry about, am I good at it? Am I bad at it? Just do it, and you'll continue to improve, continue to get better, continue to move forward. And that's really what it's all about.
That's what it's all about. And I appreciate that. And, at the end of the day, a lot of the tips kind of boil down to that, like don't let something hold you back, whether it's, fear about talking about a personal story or whatever else it might be. Like you said, just get writing, just get it out there. So thank you for that. Well, everybody, that brings us to the end of today's conversation with Daryl Dittmer. Daryl, again, your story, just going from addiction to authorship, is truly inspiring, and the wisdom you shared really just, embodies exactly what Authors on Mission is all about: finding your purpose, using it to create positive change for yourself and for others. Again, everybody, you can check out Daryl's books, When I Stop Fighting and When You Stop Fighting, on Amazon or through his websites that we'll put the links through. Daryl has offered a 15% discount on everything sold on his site. Is that true, Daryl?
That is true. I sell signed hardcover books as well as journals on my site, and 15% off for a limited time.
Awesome. So there we go, guys. Check it out. I believe you said to use the code podcast. Is that correct? At checkout? Awesome. So there you go, everybody. A nice little discount for you. Go ahead and, get out those credit cards. Check it out. And to everybody else today, if you've enjoyed today's episode, subscribe to Authors on Mission wherever you get your podcasts. And as Daryl showed us today, we all have the power to write our life stories and decide to do the work. Until next time, I'm Danielle Hutchinson, Chief Creative Officer of Authors on Mission, encouraging you to find your mission and to make it happen. Till next time, keep writing, keep leading, keep inspiring. Daryl, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Danielle.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.